She shoots and she scores. No. This is David Stevenson. Same guy. But with us today on Progressive Soup, we have Henry Pietras, who's been a regular on the show and very much a Connecticut aficionado. Then I say Connecticut, I mean the University of Connecticut women's program, and who are now on 95 consecutive wins. And Henry, tell us about the women's program, and then we'll move on to something more substantive.
Well, the UConn women's program is unique, I think, in basketball because of the coaches, obviously the recruiting, but I think in many cases UConn obviously has pretty much the same set of talent available. Yet Gino, through his program, and along with Chris Daly, Shea Ralph, and the other assistant coaches, make them into better players. Number one, they insist that above all they're good students. They all graduate. They all become young women by going through the Chris Daly finishing school. And overall, the program is outstanding. And of course, Gino has a very, very high set of standards.
Now, for those of us who watch UConn games occasionally, like myself, and we just look at the screen and we really don't know who's who, Chris Daly is the assistant coach, the tall, blondish woman who's been there forever, pretty much, maybe 20 years, I'm guessing.
She's been with Gino from day one.
So 30 years.
Yep, 30 plus years, 31,
wow.
I think.
And she probably, based on her skill and her experience, probably could be a head coach anywhere.
Yes,
maybe
absolutely.
Maybe not just in women's college basketball, but coach basketball anywhere under any situation, and yet there she is at UConn.
Yeah.
So something about that program has got her there, comfortable with what she does, comfortable with the system, and so it's a special thing in any part of life, in any step of life.
Well, over and beyond the fact that the young women get to learn how to deal with the media, they also graduate. All of them graduate, and they also move on. Many of them move on to professional basketball. Unfortunately, in the United States, that I think, as I remember, the top professional salary, even for some of the best players, is around $100,000. So most of them end up playing in Europe, where or Asia, where the salaries are much higher. Actually, Tarasi sat out a season because she could get more money. The $100,000 was nothing compared to the $1.5 million she was getting from Russia.
Wow.
So she sat out a season. Gino, in addition, has a number of players that obviously go into the pros, but if they don't, then they find work within basketball in other areas, being directors or coaches or assistant coaches in other programs. There's a number of coaches from his program who've graduated who are now head coaches. So it's more than that. So whenever Gino says come, they come. They come back whenever there's something special going on.
And maybe it's better to be just a part of the team of UConn than to be a standout for some other team.
Yeah.
I mean, you could go to another team and be a world changer, to be really a great basketball player on a good or mediocre team, or you could come to UConn and be just one of the bunch and gain all these ancillary things that you gain from being part of the UConn program.
Yeah.
Enough of that. Okay. Now we're going to go on to something a little bit more substantive or substantial, one or the other. But Henry and I both belong to a group called Democracy for America. Quick background, Democracy for America evolved out of the Howard Dean campaign in 2004, 13 years ago. Okay, a long time ago. When Howard stopped running for president, he took a month off, and Dean for America became Democracy for America. And since then, it's been run by Howard's brother, Jim Dean, and that's not Jimmy Dean. There's no pork sausages here. But Jim Dean is head of Democracy for America. It's a group of over 1 million members. It's a very potent force of very politically charged people, very politically motivated, very politically left of center or centrist in many cases. We've got a lot of folks in the group that are, shout out to Robert Oler in Texas, who works for NASA. And we've got the spectrum all covered except for the very far right fringes. So we go to the meetings every Wednesday night in Norwalk.
First Wednesday of the month.
First Wednesday of the month, 7 o'clock. And I'm going to let
Silver Star Diner.
Silver Star Diner, thank you. Silver Star Diner in Norwalk, right off of exit 14. For those of you folks that live in anywhere in Fairfield County, because we have members that come as far away as Shelton, Bethel, Brookfield, and it's a great opportunity to get politically involved. And even if you don't agree with some of the things that are said there, we're fine with that too. I mean, it's an open discussion. We're respectful. And Henry, tell us about some of the things we've been discussing in recent weeks at the Silver Star Diner.
Well, it's run by Doug Sutherland, and he's quite involved in District 4 politics, which is
that's the Gold Coast.
Yeah, it's not ST. What's
Jim
Himes.
Jim Himes, yeah.
And the one thing that they've been focusing lately is issues. So usually they have 3 issues that we discuss, and usually we bring in speakers. So there were speakers on healthcare. There was a speaker recently on Clean Water Watch, which I think we need to push through in Connecticut, and I'll get back to it in a moment. And then we had a person talk about clean energy, and we also had people from Standing Rock, people who've been there and gave us feedback as to what happened and what they needed to continue the resistance.
And we've had two members of the contingency from Connecticut that went out to Standing Rock on recently, Deb Cohen and Diane Haas, who came on and discussed their experience from a positive standpoint, not the horrible things that have happened out there, but the positive emotional effects on them of being out there. Some very heartfelt thoughts. You can look us up on YouTube or on Facebook, Progressive Soup, and catch up with those shows. Continue.
So one of the biggest efforts was the TPP, going against the TPP, trying to get our district representatives to go against the TPP, and over time we were able to convince Elizabeth Esty that it's not a good deal for us. So she came out and actually came out with a declaration saying that she was no longer going to support it. Mr. Himes, on the other hand, I know that Doug Sutherland worked with him very, very closely, but I don't think he really committed to one way or the other. Mr. Himes did come to our DFA meeting and made a case that he wasn't going to make a decision because he didn't know what the details of the actual offering or the what the actual bill was going to be. So he wasn't going to commit to yay or nay until he saw the details.
Well, his district is different than our district, 4th district versus the 5th district. He's got the Gold Coast. He's got a lot of folks, a lot of Wall Street people that live in his district. And
GE?
A representative has to abide, or at least consider the thoughts of their constituents above the thoughts of other people's constituents. So we'll give him. I have to give him a little bit of a pass on that. Although, like Henry noted, he disagrees with us. He disagrees with the entire rest of the Connecticut contingency in Congress. But he's good on a lot of other issues. So we take that all in balance. Continue.
Yeah, just for a frame of reference, Rosa DeLauro was a lead on the TPP, anti-TPP opposition.
Yeah, Trans-Pacific Partnership, continue. Yep.
So, so I think everyone except for Mr. Himes committed to resisting it. But what's important, and the important takeaway from that, is that we approached it by going town to town and having resolutions in each town asking the town committees to encourage our representatives to resist or to go against the TPP. And in the case of Elizabeth Esty, she listened, and we were successful. So now we are presented with the opportunity to do the same thing in the case of Clean Water Watch. And the Clean Water Watch is about fracking waste that right now in Connecticut we have a moratorium on bringing fracking waste to Connecticut, but that will expire in about 18 months. So as the contact we made with the person who was advocating for Clean Water Watch,
Yes.
I think it's Jen Suskind, she was working on town-by-town resolutions, which we can copy and go to each town and try to prevent that from happening.
So work from the bottom up in a grassroots fashion to start at the town level and work from there up to the
Yeah.
statewide level. If we have enough towns, enough of our
169.
Thank you, 169 towns in Connecticut. If enough of those sign on, then we have a much better chance to achieve that goal at the statewide level, and likewise at the federal level.
Yeah. So in the case of the fracking waste is coming in from Pennsylvania. We don't have any fracking in Connecticut, but they're bringing in the waste here so they can process it. And ultimately, anything that can't be processed will probably end up in our sewage system and ultimately in our water, soil, and air. So that's why the resolution saying that we don't want to hear. There's alternative ways that we can provide energy, and we need to push that as opposed to spending time on energy solutions that will go away in time. So rather than putting in a temporary solution like gas and so on, let's focus on putting in solar and research and wind or whatever else is available to offset the effects of greenhouse gases.
We've talked at great length there and in other forums about jobs that would be created by solar technology and wind technology. The construction of the panels, the construction of the wind turbines, maintenance of panels, maintenance of wind turbines, the salesmanship of getting people to recognize the benefits of both of those two alternative energies and get them to sign up for it and to take advantage of a great opportunity because well, the sun's out there, the sun's there. It provides a tremendous amount of, you can lower your electric bills significantly with solar if your house is properly positioned. Now, we've also had discussions with people about the positioning of houses, whether they be single-family homes, condominiums, commercial, industrial buildings, and how to effectively make that work better on a local level and a state level. You can speak to that.
Yeah. Well, the main idea is to orient new construction or anything that you put up that harvests energy from the sun, that it should be oriented in an optimum way. For this area, the optimum orientation is 193 degrees, not 180, which is south. 193 degrees is true south, and most equipment should be tilted at our latitude, which is 41 degrees. Now you can deviate from the ideal about 15 degrees in either direction, plus or minus in the tilt, as well as plus or minus 15 degrees in the magnetic orientation. But and the consequence is that there will be some loss of energy harvest, but it's not that bad. It's only about 5% or so. But if we have an opportunity to construct new buildings, for instance, why not take that idea and put it in front of our building guidelines and say, hey, before you even consider putting something up, consider the orientation. I understand that people will have to make some exceptions in the cases of, maybe the view or there may be an obstacle or so on in the area. So you might have to deviate, but wherever possible, try to go for optimum orientation. Not only for buildings, but things like, you've probably seen these solar panels installed on the highways. And many of those at least from me, because I'm aware, kind of drive me crazy. Because in some cases, those things are, number one, almost pointing north, or east-west.
Yeah.
And in some cases, like I can point you to a place on the Sawmill Parkway where one installation is actually in the dark or in the shade at noon, okay, which is insane.
Yeah.
So we need to go back not just to our guidelines, building guidelines, but also into contracts wherever there is a solar installation. The contract has to require that, number one, you have the optimum orientation wherever possible, but also install the any solar panels at that optimum orientation. But also, if it's on a pole, put the panel at the highest point, not at the lowest. And you'll find that on the sawmill,
Okay.
most of those panels are at the lowest point possible.
So they're way down by the ground
So they-
rather than farther up the
Exactly.
the pole.
So now, anything low has a larger opportunity to be in the shade. So you're minimizing the harvest. Not only that, but the contract should say, it has to say that the job is done right when you commit to doing yearly maintenance, so that
Yeah.
you cut off any branches or any obstacles that are in the way that will put the installation in the shade.
They're putting the responsibility on those that install.
Yeah, so it's,
solar
yes,
panels.
many a time I look at the installations and say, yeah, they did the job. Did they do it right? No. And that's the difference, because we need to have contracts that insist on not just doing the installation, but also doing it right.
Now, you had mentioned at one of our meetings a conversation you had with someone from a company which actually is a fairly widely spread and very well-known local company whose president you spoke to and didn't understand the notion of True South.
True, yeah.
Does he understand it now?
Well, 6 years ago in Newtown, I asked by the compass, what's True South in this area? He answered, oh, it's 167. Okay, 167 is opposite of the 180 that you need to add to the 13 degrees magnetic deviation, so it would be 193.
So you had it 13 in the wrong direction.
So effectively, if he was installing it and say, oh yeah, okay, True South is 167, we got a 26-degree difference.
Double the 13, yeah.
Exactly. And then if you deviate plus or minus 15 in either direction, now if you're an investor expecting the highest return for your installation, you're not getting it.
You're getting a good return, but not the best, which is what we always like to have, obviously, on any investment.
Exactly. So now, Brookfield is having a solarized Connecticut, or solarized Brookfield, and the same people got the contract, and and I asked one of his biggest engineers, who said, oh, our trainer is the guy that I spoke with 6 years before. And he again answers to the question, what's True South around here? And he says, oh, 167. So I said, you better check. And then at the end of the session, because they were selling this to Newtown, this program to Newtown, at the end of the day, he said, yeah, you're right, it's 193. So that said, that may be, I got my jollies out of it. No. The idea is that, we need to have it done right. Now, they do have instrumentation now where, they measure it, and, the system will tell them what the harvest is going to be. Because now they will even do exceptions where they'll do east-west orientations.
So you get half of the day if you're east or west.
Well, east and west, you still get some harvest, but it's not going to be 100%. It's now going to be maybe 70 to 80% harvest,
okay, but it won't
on that
be
installation.
more than half, though. Oh.
Exactly. So you lose. You lose. But some people will say, "Okay, go ahead anyway," and I'll just make up the difference by adding more panels.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, if there's one thing that I remember you saying which sticks with me, is something about not being able to argue against facts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a Neil deGrasse Tyson quote, and that says that one great thing about science is that it's true, whether you believe it or not. And, unfortunately, now we have scientists finally standing up for facts. And from what I understand, there's going to be some kind of a march somewhere.
Well, throughout history, throughout world history, there have been a lot of scientists that have stood up for the facts and been executed, ridiculed at least, executed at worst. A lot of very famous scientists in history.
Well, Galileo was under house arrest for 13 years. Copernicus, about 80 years before him, declared that the sun stood still and the earth moved around the sun, whereas before the belief was that everything revolved around our planet.
We were earth-centered, yep.
Okay, but he was kind of smart. He was religious, a cleric, and he published his book on his deathbed, so...
It was too late to get him.
Yeah. And then it took about 80 years or so to, to someone else to pick up the mantle. I mean, Kepler was there too. But Galileo is the one that we know about, which is, he's ended up being under house arrest for 13 years. And then in 1992, the Pope said, yep, Galileo was right.
It took that long, hundreds of years for
officially.
for the Pope to officially agree that the Catholic Church was wrong. And while we're talking about the Catholic Church, quick shout out to Pope Francis, best Pope ever. And he's a pretty good guy. He's not only the best Pope ever, but he's a real, true human being.
Well, the Pope does have a science background. We can't say that he has a master's or a PhD, but his background was in science. And I believe he was preparing, or maybe has taught either physics or chemistry.
So at the very least, he's a thinking man and willing to accept facts.
He's familiar with the scientific method, okay, and that's what we have to push back with. We need to go back to, okay, if you disagree with, with whatever the hypothesis or the theorem is, then put up your evidence. You want to play in the science playground? Play by the rules. And by the way, I don't believe it is not enough. If you say you don't believe, then you must put on the table your evidence for others to review and to duplicate.
Okay, back to Democracy for America.
Yeah.
What are some of the other things that we've had discussions on recent Wednesdays at Exit 14 on I-95 at the Silver Star Diner? Wednesdays, first Wednesday of the month, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And sometimes it goes a little later because we have a lot of folks that are interested in talking amongst ourselves after the actual meeting is over. What other things?
And that's the power of that meeting, because that's where we make our contacts. That's where we bring people here to the show, and also we leverage or we make contacts with people who have similar interests.
And we're all questioning people, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
So what other things have we talked about in you've been going for about 2 months now?
Oh, I've been going for a couple of years, since Bernie.
See, I took a little bit of time where I wasn't going.
Yeah.
And it was actually Henry that got me motivated to going back. So what did I miss while I was away?
Oh my God! I mean, the whole Bernie. You do know that. You know that DFA supported Bernie, and the reason they supported it is because they opened it up to membership and said, who should we support? And by 86%. Bernie got the endorsement.
A lot of stuff on Democracy for America, and this is going back to Dean for America, which preceded it. A lot of stuff has been by popular vote amongst members. When the question came up of public campaign financing back in the 2004 election, we all knew as a group, we talked about this incessantly, and we all knew that you could, if you accepted public financing, you were limited in how much money you could spend. And when the sitting president of the United States, George W. Bush, did not take public financing, he would have a wealth of money to spend. Not as much as we spend now, but back then, I think about $250 million to spend on his presidential campaign. And we talked about that, and Howard put it to a vote, and it was about a 75 or 80% of us voting to not accept public financing so we wouldn't be bound by those restrictions. In the case of Bernie Sanders, I think it was 85% of us supported Bernie Sanders, and I guess the rest of us supported Hillary Clinton because we all want to have a woman president, but just not that woman president. And that's how
Yeah.
we generally thought as a group.
Well, the meeting at the diner is very useful because you get plugged in with people who are active in their towns. So for me, I can go out and ask someone about what's the best approach to do a particular thing. The reality is that we as active people in politics, trying to make sense of what's going on, we're very much trying to connect and leverage ourselves with other people, because the reality is we can't cover all the issues. So all we can do is focus on some issues and then connect those that are more passionate in other areas into other people who are passionate like them. So I think that's the best approach. And again, with our approach is to really focus on the issues. And personally, I don't think Trump bashing does any good. I think we need to work with those people. So the sooner we bring them on board about issues, the better.
They're open to our ideas. These are not unintelligent people. Some of them are, I would say, better than half of Trump supporters are pretty thoughtful people that just decided that they were so fed up with what's going on in Washington that they were willing to try anybody.
Yeah.
Anybody.
Well, the reality is that we're in the same boat. And, you know, we all need to, you know, roll up the sleeves and start bailing.
Yeah.
And, you know, otherwise the boat sinks, and, you know, then there's no help for anybody.
And our goal as Americans is apparently not to let America sink. And that's something that we can all agree on, and through conversations, and like we did in the first show that we did, the show that was on last night with Dave Straight, you find something that you agree upon, and then you problem solve, and that's been the goal of Progressive Soup for 7.5, nearly 8 years. Henry Pietras, David Stevenson, good night. Have a good afternoon. Oh, you jumped the gun on me.